Hi everybody, this is the video for week 3 for HID 622, and this week we were talking about Perry and Kohlberg. And before I get into it, just one thing I want to reiterate that's in the discussion prompt as well. It's important to be thinking about as we discuss Perry and Kohlberg and other similar theories is that really at the essence of this isn't whether or not a decision a student makes, be it a traditional age or an adult learner. These theories aren't really looking at whether or not the decisions they make are morally or ethically right or wrong. It's really about the process in which the decision gets made. So that's something to just continue to hold out in front of you, is that we're talking about how do people learn to make decisions, not necessarily the subject of the decision itself and whether we say, well, that's the correct decision or incorrect or morally right or morally wrong. So just wanted to reiterate that because I think that's a really important part. So just a couple of thoughts, one on Perry and then one on Kohlberg. And the thing about Perry that I want to reiterate, especially as we talk about decisions students make, and maybe specific students or specific decisions you made when you were a student, is that the context of a decision makes all the difference in the world, especially when we're talking about Perry and we're talking about dualism, this idea that there's a right and a wrong, a very clear right and wrong, and oftentimes that process of being a dualistic thinker for a student happens within the context of a environment that is pretty heavily emphasized, or influenced by an authority figure. So if you think like, man, when you're a high school student, it might be, in your home, it could be a parent or a guardian, it could be a coach, it could be a mentor, it could be a pastor. Anyways, there's all sorts of people who function as authority figures in your life. And as a result, how do you make a right decision? It's simply, well, what does the authority figure say is the right decision? Because they're ultimately the ones who are calling the shots. And so then I'm going to make a decision, maybe even without knowing, that aligns with them. When you get to college, however, after being in high school, it becomes a little bit more challenging because you meet new authority figures, you'll meet new faculty members, and they're going to encourage you to maybe think for yourself, and why did you hold to that belief or whatever, and begin to question maybe the status of previous authority figures. And so the reality is that the context of a student changes and their authority figures change, and then sometimes they maybe just shift from, well, rather than listening to my youth pastor, I'm going to listen to my college professor. But other times they'll be like, well, I guess I can't trust authority figures. I have to figure this out on my own, and that sometimes is where a shift will take place out of dualism, and then maybe moving more into a different phase like multiplicity. I think a great way sometimes to sort of think about the experience of college students, especially in their first or second year, is to just think about maybe this statement. Sometimes college students say, man, this is a highly confusing environment because it seems like everybody wants the right answer, but nobody is willing to give me the right answer. And it's this process of them having to figure out, well, where do answers come from and how do they get made? And like I said, the context can change for that, relationships can change for that, and then even the subjects of what they're talking about can become new and different. So for example, then this will maybe talk or lead into some conversations next week about faith. When you go to college and you begin to differentiate from your parents, you might begin to differentiate around a number of things in your family of origin. It might be about your politics. It might be about what your parents thought you should study, but it also could be about your faith. What do you believe to be true about the world, and how do you know those things? And so it's just something to think about. You can move away from maybe a understanding of this is right and this is wrong and this is because the way I've always been taught, to, wow, my context has changed, my authority figures have changed, I'm seeing maybe a little bit more of my own agency in this, and so what I believe to be right and wrong can shift as well. So that's just some things to think about with Perry. With Kohlberg, and there's this pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional model. Maybe it's really helpful to think about what each one is looking at. And pre-conventional it's kind of a carrot and stick situation where, what's right is what I get rewarded for, what's wrong is what I get punished for. So it's really about, avoiding punishment is the right decision. Then maybe the movement to conventional, and sometimes this could happen in a college student as well, as rather than worried about punishment, it becomes about what is pleasing to others. And so, this might be where a student, and maybe you have this for those of you who teach, I know several of you in the class do, where you have this situation with students coming in and say, well, what is the right answer? What do you want? And it's this sense of, well, I want to give you what you want because I want to please you, and ultimately you're the person who has authority over me. And so, like, what is the best decision? The best decision is one that pleases others. And then as you move kind of into post-conventional, it's more along the lines of, rather than worried about what's pleasing others, it's more along the lines of what is being consistent with my personal values. What do I believe to be universally true? What do I believe to be right? And then decisions would align with that. And so it's this movement from kind of carrot stick to pleasing others to being consistent with personal values. And maybe that's a helpful framework as you think about decisions in this week's discussion. So anyways, just a couple of thoughts, just moving us forward. Next week, we are going to be talking about faith and faith formation. And I think the context of this conversation, both with Perry and Kohlberg and others, maybe we'll set the stage for as we move into conversations around us. How does faith form in the life of emerging adults and then into college and beyond? So we'll begin that conversation next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.